Hello everybody, welcome back to this channel. My name is Phil Marriott. If you love music and movies, then this is the channel for you. Today we're talking horror with my partner in crime for horror, Paul Joseph.
Hello.
So it's called A Banquet. It's directed by Ruth Paxton. With this film, I think it started off in America, but they relocated. I don't know if that's anything to do with the pandemic. It stars Jessica Alexander, Ruby Stokes, and the legend herself, Lindsay Duncan.
She's that sort of Miranda Richardson level of TV and film drama gravitas.
Yeah, I mean, potentially, I suppose this plot-wise could be quite triggering for some. It's about a teenage daughter. It's a widowed mother. That is from the offset. That's not a plot spoiler. There are two daughters, but the daughter who is one of the main characters in this is Jessica Alexander. She plays Betsy, but she's having problems eating. She loses her appetite, but she goes to a party. There's a red moon. Red moon kind of signifies something ominous is about to happen, but she doesn't lose weight. But she loses her appetite, and her mother is quite concerned by this.
Obviously, the mum's a more complex character than you'd think, and has her own issues and her own past, and some of that comes through in conversations with the mum, who's Lindsay Duncan, who's obviously now playing grandmothers. When it's all played a little bit icily cool, it's kind of quite hard sometimes to tell what's intentional and what's not intentional in terms of like how people are responding to stuff. The film does start with a horrific scene of her husband's death, and I think that's, in the context of that, it's kind of like all the stuff that's going on, and then, you know, a teenage daughter with an eating disorder, you know, middle-class family, and older teenage child goes through mental health problems probably isn't something that feels that out of the blue, maybe. But of course, the way it manifests itself then does become more weird.
I mean, a lot of these shots, you know, are at the dinner table. It's massive dinner table, massive room. That's the thing about these locations as well, because this room, it reminded me of quite a few other modern horror films where you got that dim lighting, you could see the woods and the trees outside through the windows. I mean, stylistically, it looked amazing. I mean, I thought it was gorgeous to look at. The cinematography, I thought was great.
HEREDITARY's like that, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's kind of this, It did look very well. It looked really kind of clean and polished, and it, you know, that maybe adds to some of the coolness of it as well. And by coolness, I mean coldness rather than trendiness.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's quite intentional, because for me, sometimes with the conversations, it made the conversations feel less intimate because of the massive space. But I suppose that, you know, that was deliberate to make you feel quite anxious when you're watching it, because it's almost you know, that doesn't feel like a normal scenario. Because, I mean, that house, it was almost like showroom, wasn't it? I mean, showroom stylistically, it felt very clean and very new. And it's almost like they hadn't actually used anything in the rooms. All the gadgets were there and, you know, the modern furniture. I mean, gorgeous to look at. But in some ways, that drew me out a little bit because I wanted more intimacy.
Yeah, and it also didn't quite therefore ring true as a home that had, you know, until recently was, you know, two parents and two teenage daughters, and that kind of like sort of like ramshackle busyness of life and teenagers and lived-inness, maybe. But again, when you look at how it unfolds, you know, and so much around, you know, it's talking about appetite and potential eating disorders, and can that be wrapped in with kind of other disorders around obsessive compulsive behavior and tidiness and whatever. So it might all link, because obviously it does play out in a way where there's different interpretations as to what's going on. There could be a narrative that's taking you down the more sort of supernatural, divine. By divine, I don't mean, unfortunately, the drag queen RIP, because that would have been interesting.
That would have been interesting. But you are right, though, because I read somewhere that the director, Ruth Paxton, she does suffer with anxiety. I think that was intentional, that, you know, she was interested in the kind of horror that manifests in your head rather than what is obvious.
And also, you know, when someone is then displaying very upsetting behaviour and, you know, is clearly in a bad way, first off, they believe what's going on. It's then whether you believe it, and actually whether you do or not, the effect that what's going on is still there and is still apparent. So regardless of the root of this problem, it's still obviously having a huge impact on the family. And, you know, and the plot progresses to kind of slowly remove, not in a being bumped off kind of way, no spoilers, other characters, that it does then end up focusing on the relationship between the mother and the daughter. I think this is probably intentional. Then it did have slight resonance with The Exorcist. If you think about The Exorcist, it's kind of like a mother trying desperately to help her daughter who is going through this big thing. And there was a few scenes that towards the end that kind of made me think of that. And I think that's a credit to the film, really. And it had that claustrophobia and that kind of helplessness.
Visually, it's quite visceral, and there's a lot of close-ups, sound effects as well. The sound design makes you again quite anxious, because you've got like shots of people eating chicken and that kind of slurpy noise that they make, and people when they're kissing and drug taking as well, and the bacon when they're cooking the bacon is sizzling.
All that. And it kind of, and interesting, it has that, there's a bacon scene where, I mean, I know you're vegan, I'm vegetarian, but, I know that bacon is something that a lot of people go, ooh, and it's like the sizzling of it is an appealing thing. But in this, it certainly isn't. They managed to make it all seem very revolting.
Yeah, because it's sensory, but all for the wrong reasons.
A good vegan conversion film. But it's probably more likely a good convert people to not eating at all film. And also, the film starts with quite an extended, noisy blending scene, of like someone making a smoothie or something while something else is going on that we then see.
But Lindsay Duncan, I mean, her character, she's the granny, like you said. She arrives, and I thought that was a really interesting shift, because the mother is kind of looking after the daughter, but she seems to be quite patient to begin with, and then she goes nuts. She goes a bit nuts because she's trying to help her daughter, obviously, and she takes her to the doctor without spoiling anything. But the grandmother is quite no nonsense. I love the way she arrives, and she's kind of like just basically saying, "Pull yourself together," but not in those words. But she doesn't take any shit.
And also, she has some interesting insights into previous behaviour of the girl when she was younger, and also we then obviously she sheds light on her daughter, the mother's character as well. I'm a huge fan of the film Hereditary, and I wouldn't say this reaches that level, but I'm referencing it because there's certain things in the same way. Hereditary, Midsummer, a lot of these films work because the protagonist isn't on an even keel to start with. And obviously the mother in this has gone through this horrific thing at the beginning. It did remind me of stories of, in Catholicism over the years, what they call miraculous girls, who were young females who would often starve. And I think that stemmed from kind of like starving as a way of sort of worshipping or abstinence, but also just it being a sort of a miracle, and that kind of like girls who were surviving despite eating, and it was like the Lord was coming into them and all this sort of stuff. So I think, I'm saying this in quite a vague way because I don't know the details, but I definitely know that there's a sort of history of that within Christianity. You add that to that kind of traditional sense of female hysteria and fervour of teenage girls and hormonal girls and all those sort of things that, was always associated as being this, and people having demons in them and being wicked, or being the other way, being blessed or being touched or being chosen, or that sort of stuff, which historically so much that ends up being misdiagnosis or stuff to cover up other abuses and all sorts of other things.
Food in movies. What is the first film that comes to mind when you think of food in movies? For me, it's Raw, which is weird because I'm a vegan. I shouldn't be thinking of someone who wants to eat raw meat, but I do because I love that film.
I saw one last year, a couple of years ago in lockdown. It was a Netflix thing called Platform. There's unknown levels of people, and in the middle there's a space with it, and a big banqueting table starts at the top, full of food, and there's two people on each level, and it slowly goes down. And the idea is that there's actually, if everybody was just to eat what they need, there's enough food to go to feed everyone. But of course people, and it's just, so you have these like, this table coming down covered in scraps with everyone, fighting over it. That's a really good film. It's
really difficult when you live with someone who's not necessarily into horror that much, because I always try and find horrors that I think Jeremy will like. That he can stomach. It's not like he doesn't like violence, so I struggle sometimes.
Same with my husband Tim. He doesn't either, and it's like it's kind of certain things. He'll lead me to it. Chocolat.
We're making it easy for everyone now, aren't we?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
No
comment
excuse.
Below.
No excuse for not leaving a comment, because we've given you quite a few suggestions. So, A Banquet. What's your overall verdict? I started off liking it. I thought it was really promising. I loved the look of it. I thought the direction was great. I'm kind of looking forward to seeing where Ruth Paxton goes next with her next film. But for me, what let it down was the screenplay. I thought the script was really lacking. I didn't think there was enough meat, says the vegan, for them to get their teeth into. I thought because I thought certain scenes, it's like when the daughter walks in and her mother's there and she kind of says, "Oh, hi, Mum." It just felt like you wouldn't really behave like that in a scenario. It just felt very stilted for me.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely that kind of, you look at something, you think that could have probably done with a few more drafts just to turn it down a little, to make it seem a bit more normal. That didn't particularly be something that stick out for me. I think, for me, I felt like it was definitely above average and definitely way above average British horror. I think the overall plot and story and the issues it's dealing with, it does that quite well. But I think there is similar to what you were saying, there's a bit of a lull in terms of some of how punchy it could possibly be, which could be the script, could also possibly be the acting. I think it also does have the challenge of having, really, apart from a couple of sort of friends, boyfriend type characters, you've really got most of it is the four female characters, to the younger teenage daughter, the older teenage daughter, the mother and the grandmother, and kind of quite all quite similar kind of middle class flat kind of tones, kind of. So it's not, it's almost in a way, maybe it's just a bit too polite. Too polite.
I was just thinking that. Yeah,
is I guess how a middle class family, our middle class through and through would deal with stuff. So you could argue that that's intentional. I also think, like, I'm going to sound a bit mean now, but for me, Sienna Guillory is one of those names you hear, but you can never picture them. I'm like, not Sienna Miller, not Saffron Burrows. It's a bit like if I was to say to you, like, Hugh Dancy, or these kind of, like, some of these sort of, like, late 90s, early noughties names. I think the way that maybe some of the actors have played this is a bit more TV than movies. It almost, like, I think there could have been a bit more to it. So I don't know whether that's a directorial choice or...
That's interesting, yeah. So it could be down to the casting. That's maybe not what was sitting right with me, because something wasn't right, and I thought it was the script. But I think it probably is a mixture of both of those things.
And if you're saying it was originally intended to be in America, I think the conventions of horror films and cinema and so much we've seen, I think stuff in an American accent you can kind of get away with a bit more. So I think British films have to quite often punch a bit harder to not just look like posh versions of what in America would be suburbia or something like that.
Yeah, I'm going to go with 3 stars. 3, because there are a lot of things that I liked about it, and I am looking forward to seeing where she goes next, because I think she's got a great vision as a director.
Yeah, definitely. Like, really, so it's the first feature, is it? That's great. I mean, to get a film made these days, let alone to get it released and to be good and, to be engaging, I certainly wasn't bored with it. I was interested to see how it played out. I kind of liked the conclusion, because I think you can take it different ways. Obviously we can't really talk about that now, so I don't want to give any spoilers away. So I also would give 3 stars, and I would be thinking more not quite 4 stars, and obviously as we've discussed, can't do half, so I'm going to say 3 as well. Excellent.
So it's out on VOD, I think, on the 18th of February. And apparently they're showing it in UK cinemas on the 11th of March, or from the 11th of March. I don't know, those release dates might change to coincide with each other, or maybe cinema release first. But I know that I think it's getting a US release first. So
I think it's been in, like, Toronto and some film festival stuff, hasn't it?
Yeah.
I would say it's one of those films where I don't know whether to say eat it on an empty stomach, because then you might lose your appetite. But I don't want to say watch it after you've eaten, because you might throw up. I don't think you want to eat while you're watching it, particularly not the dream scene.
Oh yes, that's very good advice.
There's a dream scene that relates that as all things in horror do, that it plays out as being a real scene, then turns so ridiculous that then someone wakes up. But and it relates to a kind of myth that's been told in the film by the grandmother, I think it is. A story that involves food and whatever, and then it kind of plays out in so it has lots of very messy, horrible food in places it shouldn't be, and then something even more horrid.
Word of warning for you if you're going into this. Thank you as always, Paul. Great to see you, and thank you everybody for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And by the way, check out our review of Stage Fright, which was the Italian slasher from 1987, which came back in 2021, or the tail end of 2021.
Stage Fright.
Yeah. We need a saxophone and a wind machine.
Yeah.
And we've got a scary shit playlist as well, which you can click on. Lots of horror stuff there to get your teeth into.